Oh, hello. Welcome to Travel Trivia ASMR and another gentle jaunt around the world. And today it is a gentle jaunt around the beautiful and divine Sverige. I apologise right now for my Swedish pronunciation. I am going to try some Swedish words and place names. Maybe it's better. If I mostly stick to the word Sweden. Now I'll say right from the start, I love Sweden. I think there are only 3 or 4 countries that I've been to more. And I hope in this video to share some of the tales from my travels and some of the tidbits and curios that I've discovered along the way. I certainly invite you to do the usual things, like and subscribe, and leave comments if you have been to the places I'm talking about, or if you even live there and know them well. It'd be thrilling to hear from you. Now, the point of these videos is they are little quizzes, and I start by asking 10 questions, which we will spend the duration of the video, however long that turns out to be, answering. Some of them are questions that you could answer straight away in a word, but even then they are opportunities to have a bit of a discussion. If you don't know the answers straight away, I hope that you might at least be able to make an educated guess. And if you're worldly wise, which I assume you are because you're joining me for this, then you should be able to make a stab at every question. Now I'll explain a little more about the map that we're looking at right now and show you some more maps along the way too. But first, let's see what the questions are. And if you're of a certain persuasion like me, that is, a Eurovision fan, that is clearly the only topic to start with. When Sweden first won Eurovision, who sang the song? Now, you don't really have to be a Eurovision superfan to know that. You only really need to have had a passing interest over the years, but if you are someone who has just said, well, I know that, that's obvious, please stick around because I've got a supplementary question when we get to the answer. On the other hand, if you don't know the answer to that question, perhaps you don't even know what Eurovision is. Well, I hope the question would make clear that it's a song contest. And that being the case, maybe you can guess. Here's question 2. Now, if I had made this video only a year or so ago, I would have been able to say Sweden's tallest building. In fact, there is now one taller. But nonetheless, the building I have in mind is Malmö's tallest building. And the question about it is, Malmö's tallest building was one of the first skyscrapers in the world to do what? And you notice I've put the words one of in brackets. There is a reason for that, and it is a discussion. I was going to say a fascinating discussion. I mean, that's a matter of opinion, but we will have that discussion, whether it's fascinating or not. Here comes question 3. And we're visiting Old Norse mythology and Old Norse, the language, on 2 occasions in this little quiz. This is the first one. Which Old Norse word, meaning narrow, strait, is at the start of city names in not just Sweden, but also Denmark and Finland? And I'm tempted to give you a clue. Should I give you a clue? No, not yet. But there are 3 cities, one in Sweden, one in Denmark, one in Finland, which all start with very similar letters, and it's because there is an Old Norse word that they have in common. So what are those cities and what is that word? Oh look. Well, just as you can't have Sweden without Eurovision, neither can you have Sweden without IKEA. There's a pretty good chance you've come across IKEA in your time. And if you have you ever stopped to ask yourself, what do the letters IKEA stand for? If you've never heard of IKEA, you're possibly in a minority among people watching this, but you might still be able to have a guess. It is, of course, something Swedish. Here's question 5. What was introduced when the Olympics were held in Stockholm in 1912? Now, I was thinking about this. Were they introductions because of the Swedish connection, or in spite of them? That's an interesting part of the answer, actually, but certainly there are many answers to this, actually. If this was a pub quiz, it would be a pretty poor question, to tell you the truth, because there are at least 4 different answers that I know of. One of them in particular seems really Swedish to me. We'll see if you agree later on. Question 6. This is a bit of a pub quiz staple. Have you come across it? What basic infrastructure did Sweden change on Sunday the 3rd of September 1967? And it's worth adding that the change was made at 5 o'clock in the morning. So Sunday morning at 5 o'clock probably gives you a bit of a clue. It was obviously something which, had it been 8 o'clock on Monday morning, would have been far more disruptive. So they hid it away in the early hours of Sunday. Here's number 7. Which boy's name is the Swedish word for brown bear? Again, think of some famous Swedish people, you can probably get there. But I ask this question because of the place in Stockholm where you can go and see a brown bear, and it is a stunning place. Don't miss the answer to number 7. Here's question 8. Also an attraction in Stockholm, the bar in the Hotel C in Stockholm was the first in the world to be decorated in what way? There are now dozens of such bars, but the one in Stockholm, I believe, was the first. What does it have inside? Here's number 9. And we're off to Uppsala here. What was invented by a professor of astronomy at the University of Uppsala in 1742? And maybe we should add that he was a little more than just an astronomer. He was also a professor of physics and mathematics. So we might want to look wider than just astronomy. On the other hand, maybe that's a red herring. I wonder if you can guess. Here's question 10. Back to Norse mythology, and a lovely way to finish. According to Norse mythology, when they dug up the land to make Sweden's largest lake, where did they put it? And of course the beautiful thing about mythology is that we can suspend disbelief and believe that in order to create a lake, somebody comes along and digs up the land so that water can go in. Obviously that's what happened, right? Well, when that happened, where did they put that land that they had dug up? So there you go. There are the 10 questions. I hope there's something there to whet your appetite. And if you do want to jump to one answer in particular, do please use the timestamps to jump straight to those chapters. And you can find those in the description of the video. But if you're staying with me for the duration, let's go. And I would just like to say, before we get into the first question, that I would dearly love to be able to draw maps on camera. I would thoroughly enjoy doing it. The only trouble is that my eyesight is not what you would want it to be, and therefore the only way to really draw a map is to peer very closely at the page, and therefore you would be looking at the back of my head most of the time. So for that reason, I've embellished this map a little bit in advance, and I have put the coast in blue there. Of course the red represents land borders with Norway in this case. Oslo would be about here, and Finland over here, and of course sweeping down to there. I've also drawn in part of Denmark, since that's kind of relevant to any visit to Sweden. Certainly if you're like me, you can't be in Copenhagen without popping over to Malmö for the day. You can't be in Malmö without popping over to Copenhagen for the day. And I have in my time done both. We'll give some more details about that in a minute. Also worth saying that the second reason I'm not going to attempt to draw maps is because I don't even hope to hold a candle to one of the finest ASMR artists out there in the community. If you know your ASMR maps, I'm sure you know ASM Arctica, who is, of course, Swedish. And you won't find better hand-drawn maps anywhere. So, a nod to him, and I think it's because of him that I started to get into ASMR. So, do check him out if you don't know him yet. So, our first question was about Eurovision. When Sweden first won Eurovision, who sang the song? Now, we go straight in with flags here. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I always like to include a flag. But this time, there is little difference. I'm not going to use my usual packet of flags on cardboard, on little playing cards. Instead, I mean, this is much better, of course. Instead, I'm going to show you on the back of this scarf we have the Swedish flag right in the middle of the Eurovision heart. And for the uninitiated, I think this should fit very neatly on the screen. There you go. The Eurovision Song Contest. If you are misguided or just unlucky and you have not discovered the joy of Eurovision, well, let me enlighten you. You'll be unsurprised to know it's an annual song competition, and it's on television across Europe. Started in 1956 as a means of countries cooperating with each other, but specifically broadcasters cooperating with each other. And actually it isn't really the countries themselves taking part, it is the TV stations from those countries taking part. Eurovision as an organisation is actually far more than the contest. It is the network of satellites, cables, permanent cameras and so on, which allow any broadcast from around Europe and the world to be shared amongst the member broadcasters. So if you ever see live sport or you watch the news and there's live footage from somewhere or even recorded footage from somewhere, the chances are that Eurovision, the network, will have been involved in providing some part of that infrastructure. But for most of the public, the song contest is the be-all and end-all where Eurovision is concerned, and it takes place on one of the Saturdays in May, often the third one. And 2 countries have won it 7 times at the time that I'm recording this. Knowing how good Sweden are, by the time you see this, they may have actually taken the outright lead and won an 8th or a 9th. But for now, Sweden have won 7 times, and as a result, Sweden have hosted it 7 times. And that's because if you win, you're invited to host it the next year. And so that is why If I just move that up ever so slightly. That's why I have been to Sweden as many times as I have, apart from a tourist visit. I went to Eurovision in 2016 in Stockholm and 2024 in Malmö. Also, there was one in 2014 which took place in Copenhagen, and of course during our time in Copenhagen we popped over to Malmo. But anyway, enough about me. What about the answer to the question? Well, I'm sure you might have guessed, even if you didn't know. The answer to that question is of course, it's ABBA. And if you guessed that straight away, well, do you know which song? The winning song in 1974 was Waterloo. But I actually have an additional question, just to please those of you who knew that straight away. I'll ask the question, then I'll give you a few moments to think about it while I witter on about something else. The question is that ABBA did win Eurovision for Sweden when they finally entered in 1974. But the previous year, I hate to patronise you, but obviously that means 1973. The previous year, they tried to win the prize of representing Sweden with a different song, which is now known to ABBA fans. Once they became famous by having won Eurovision, the song that they'd failed to qualify with the year before did also become well known. The selection process for the Swedish Eurovision entry is also a TV show, only shown in Sweden, and it's called Melodifestivalen. And every year, even to this day, various acts enter Melodifestivalen in the hope of representing their country at the Eurovision Song Contest. Well, in Melodifestivalen in 1973, the band that would become known as ABBA, they weren't called ABBA yet, they entered a different song. So what was that song? I'll tell you in a moment. They were beaten into third place. They only came third in that Melodifestivalen, and the winners, who of course have disappeared into total obscurity like most Eurovision acts before and after them, they actually used a different name in Melodifestivalen. They used the name Malta, but because there might have been confusion with the country Malta, on Eurovision nights they actually changed their name to the Nova and the Dolls, and they won Melodifestivalen but came fifth at Eurovision in 1973. And the song was in Swedish, but I'm going to give the English translation of it because I'm brave enough to try some Swedish in this video, but not this one. It was it was translated as Your Summer, and as I say, it beat Björn, Benny, Agneta and Anni-Frid into third place. I just mentioned the names of the members of ABBA, and I'm sure you know that the A of Agneta, the B of Björn and Benny, and then the A of Anni-Frid, they make up the letters of ABBA. In 1973, I gather they went by the name Björn, Benny, Agneta and Anni-Frid at Melody Festivalen. So, did you get the song? I mean, if you're really nice to me and leave a comment, I might even sing it to you. Well, hum it maybe. Yeah, leave the singing to the professionals, eh? The song was Ring, Ring. That is the song that failed to make Eurovision in 1973. But, of course, they came up with Waterloo the following year, and the rest is history. Before we leave the topic of Eurovision and Swedish music in general, it's worth saying, isn't it, that there are so many pop artists who have come from Sweden and have had international success. Even if you didn't guess ABBA as the answer to the original question, you could well have been forgiven for guessing any number of people who the world knows. Roxette, the DJ Avicii in more recent years, Ace of Base, of course, the Cardigans from when I was growing up, and Europe, as in the Final Countdown. And that's just music. The world of acting also has an unlikely number of internationally famous Swedish people. Greta Garbo, Ingrid Bergman, the director, Ingmar Bergman as well. And then you get into sport with Stefan Edberg and Björn Berg, and even somebody like Alfred Nobel, who invented dynamite, and of course gave his name to the Nobel Peace Prize. Can there be another country, at least another country of its size, which I think is around 10 million, can there be another country that has made such a contribution to the world in terms of providing entertainment that almost everybody knows about? It's an astonishing achievement, it really is. Either Sweden is very good at marketing, or they're just an exceptionally talented bunch. And because there's a strong possibility that if you've found this video, you may be watching from Sweden, or you may know Swedish people. Let's go with the second of those suggestions, shall we? Certainly, where Eurovision is concerned, they are unrivaled. So thank you, Sweden. I must now put my Swedish Eurovision scarf away. And so, let's go on to question 2. I do want to mark up this map with places that we mention. I've mentioned Malmo, which is, of course, where Sweden last hosted Eurovision, and it's somewhere like here, isn't it? And I'm not sure where to write Malmo there. I want to try to avoid writing it actually on the borderlines, if I can. And we're staying in Malmö for question 2. We're talking about Malmö's tallest building and asking, it was one of the first skyscrapers in the world to do what? Now, when I first visited Malmö, which was in, 2008, this is long before I started to go to Eurovision in Sweden. When I first visited, I could have written Sweden's tallest building here, because at that point it was the tallest building in Sweden. It has since been overtaken, and we'll come to that. Let's just show you a picture of it, and as soon as you see it, and as soon as you see its name, we'll basically see the answer to the question. The glorious turning torso, which was the first building in the world, apparently, to twist. As you can see from that picture, the orientation of the floor twists through 90 degrees when you work your way up from the bottom to the top. And actually, on more than one visit to Malmö, I have made a bit of a pilgrimage to go and look at it. It's a fair walk out of the city centre, but what it is close to is the Öresund, namely the strait of sea between Sweden and Denmark, and of course, crossing that strait between Malmö and Copenhagen, you have the Öresund bridge. You're not supposed to call it bridge because it's only a bridge for the majority of the way. It actually disappears into a tunnel on the Danish side, and I have a feeling you're supposed to call it the Öresund fixed link. But who says that? Nobody. So the Öresund bridge is close by, and so as a second best, having been out to look at the turning torso, you've only a short walk to get to the coastline and have a look at the bridge. I must say that it is a bit of a missed trick by the owners of this building, that at least when I was in town, you couldn't go up and stand on a viewing gallery near the top and see the glorious sight, as it surely must be, of the Öresund and the bridge and Denmark in the distance. But sadly, I don't think you can do that. It's residential. But what about the wording of the question was one of the first in the world, in brackets? Well, here we get into the knotty world of the organisation that decides what a building is. And they're a strange bunch, to say the least. Let me just go to this article here, and actually this article is linked from the reference section at the bottom of that Wikipedia page I was just looking at. So this is the direct source material. And so this organisation, Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. It's exciting stuff, isn't it? Well, here's an article from August of 2016 in which they talk about tall buildings, and in particular, twisting tall buildings. Now, if if we go down here, we can see, here's a little paragraph all about the turning torso. When the turning torso, designed by Santiago Calatrava architects and engineers, was completed in 2006, the world had its first twisting skyscraper. In the 11 years since then, of course that's vastly out of date now, an additional 28 buildings of at least 90 metres have been completed, and that figure of 28, I'm sure, is out of date too. But the reason I wanted to put one of in brackets is because, well, let's go back to the list here with its lovely pictures. There is actually another building on this list, and this Wikipedia list ranks the twisted towers in order of height, I think. Let's just check that. Yes, they're getting higher, aren't they? Yeah. But the interesting thing is the date, because the article I was just looking at says the turning torso in Malmö was completed in 2005. But there is another, which I actually saw recently for myself too. And it's this one, Telecom Tower in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Taller than the turning torso, but that's not really the interesting bit. Look at the date, 2001. So why did that article from the body of suits who decide what a building is, whatever they were called, why would they say, I do know what they were called there, Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. Why aren't they counting this one as a twisting building? And I think if you look at it very closely, you can imagine why. I imagine that it's because the twist only starts halfway up there, and this facade here does not twist at all. Indeed, you could probably look at the telecom tower in Kuala Lumpur from ground level, from down here somewhere, and you'd fail to notice the twist, whereas that certainly can't be said of the one in Malmö. So I suppose that's the reason they can say that the twisting, the turning torso in Malmö was the world's first. Basically, if you shift the parameters, you can put a superlative on anything. So, certainly you can in geography lists. I did mention that when I visited in 2008, not long after that building was built, of course, we could have said that was Sweden's and indeed Scandinavia's tallest building, but it has been overtaken by that one, the Karlatornet, which is in Gothenburg in Sweden. So that is now the tallest building in Sweden, relegating the turning torso from the top of the table. But I'm sure the folks of Malmo are not that bothered. They've still got a glorious building. Sweden does have some quite adventurous architecture, it has to be said. Gothenburg also has buildings that look like a lipstick. There's one that looks like a big ship. The arena in Stockholm that's now called the Avicii Arena, named after the DJ, previously called Globen, which, by the way, hosted the Eurovision Song Contest in 2016. That was at one point the world's largest spherical building. It too has now been overtaken by one in, I forget where now. I think it's in the Middle East somewhere. But it doesn't really matter because we're only talking about Sweden. Suffice to say, Sweden does jolly good buildings very, very well. And so the answer to this question, what was Malmö's tallest building, one of the first to do? Twist is the answer. And just before we move on, I'd kind of like to put Gothenburg on the map too, just because we've mentioned it. And I did visit Gothenburg on my first trip to Sweden. I stopped in Malmö and then took the train up the coast to Gothenburg and then across to Stockholm. And I really do hesitate to give the Swedish pronunciation of the word Gothenburg, because I'm bound to do a very shoddy job, but it's something like Göteborg. I'm very sorry that that's not exactly right. We'll put it on the map in a moment because we're going to talk about some other place names. Indeed, here is question 3. Which Old Norse word meaning narrow strait is at the start of city names in Sweden, Denmark and Finland? Now, to answer this, let's have a look at a roadmap of Europe, which, granted, is a year or 2 or 3 or 4 old, but the cities will still be in the same place. And I must find the south of Sweden. Here it is. Now, one thing I was thinking about perhaps doing, or perhaps asking about, was actually the origins of Sverige, the Swedish name for Sweden, and also Göteborg, brackets, Gothenburg. Both of those place names, I understand, come from the names of tribes who, back along, turned up in that part of the world, and in the case of Sweden, managed to work their way around quite a lot of northern Europe. The Sveat tribe gave their name to Sverige. The Yurts, or in English I think we say Goths, they became the origin of Göte, which is in turn Göteborg, meaning the city of the Yurts. Those two tribes formed the country that we now know as Sweden and Gothenburg. It is nothing to do with Goths, of course, though I was quite charmed to see, lounging around on a cold September day down at the Riverside Inn, Gothenburg, I did see some teenagers dressed as Goths, and that's a very pleasing sort of thing to happen when you're into words and geography. But our question is about the Old Norse word that means narrow, straight. Another translation of it is neck, but in the context of geography and land and sea, then a neck and a strait amount to the same thing. And those of you who are really eagle-eyed will have noticed we have a narrow strait between Sweden and Denmark. So, where between Sweden and Denmark are there two places with very similar names? They are, of course, at the narrowest point of the Öresund, the strait between Sweden and Denmark. The narrowest point, it's 3.5 kilometres, which is nothing, of course. It's close enough for you to see across to the other country from, particularly if you go up a tower, as there is one on the Swedish side, and I went up there, you can clearly see Denmark. Well, the cities are, and once again, please forgive my Swedish pronunciation and my Danish pronunciation, come to that. Helsingborg, to English eyes, Helsingborg, that's the Swedish one. Over on the other side, difficult to see on this map because the city name is sort of printed on top of the clutter of the coast there, but it's Helsingør on the Danish side, also known to English literature fans as Elsinore, as in Shakespeare's play Hamlet. And so you've got Helsing on both sides there, Helsingborg and Helsingør. And that means that the answer that we're looking for here is Helsing. Actually, I think the original Old Norse word is just Hels. That's the narrow strait, and then you add bits on the end to mean people of the strait. I think the Danish one, Helsingør, simply means that, the people of the Helsing, or the narrow strait. Helsingborg in the Swedish, the word B-O-R-G, or the suffix B-O-R-G, that's similar to Berg in German and Borough in English, and indeed in Scottish place names, B-U-R-G-H. All of those mean a fort or a city, and then of course we have a third place to talk about. I'm sure you've put two and two together to make, well, three in this case, and the third of these places is of course the capital of Finland, Helsinki. It's worth checking on Google Maps, I think, so that we can zoom right in. If Helsing means narrow strait. Well, is there one in Helsinki? And pardon me for leaving Sweden for a moment, but of course Finland was once under Swedish control, and many Finnish people do speak Swedish, and they have a Swedish way of spelling their capital city. It's Helsingfors, F-O-R-S. Well, fors in the Swedish, that suffix, refers to rapids or waterfalls which occur in the strait in question. And I wonder if I can find out where it is. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do, because I happen to know that the strait is on the river Vanta. Vanta also being the name of Helsinki's international airport. And so is that the Vanta River there? Let's check. No. Oh, where's the Vanta River? It's around here somewhere. Maybe that was the Vanta River. Just see if it goes down to the sea. Yeah. And so I think the strait that gives its name to Helsingfors, aka Helsinki, is this point where the river flows into the sea, and it makes a little strait there before it reaches open sea. So that's the origin of those three place names, all named after a narrow strait. Now, of course, this should not come as news to people who have been to Helsingborg, as we might say in English. I won't put the Danish one on, but it's facing Helsingborg, right across the strait there. If you've been to that area, as I have, you'll probably know that you can get a ferry from Helsingborg to Helsingør in Denmark, and it takes about 20 minutes. And the curious thing about it is that because of the customs rules in Denmark and Sweden, you can only buy alcohol for half of the journey and tobacco for the other half of the journey. And I don't want to say which way round it is, because I can't remember for the life of me. I mean, I spent the 20 minutes of the ferry ride simply getting excited about the fact that we were crossing a border. So any other information went in one ear out the other. But it's curious. The duty, and they announced this on the boat, the duty free is open only for alcohol for half that journey and only for tobacco for the other half. So I imagine it's a bit of a booze cruise destination. I just want to put Göteborg, Gothenburg on my map, and so where shall we go? Let's try page 196. There we are, look. That's going to give us a landmark to place Göteborg. So it's, I'd say that's about halfway between the Öresund Strait that we were just talking about and the Oslo fjord, which goes up to Oslo there. Probably about halfway. And also it's sort of due west of this lake here, isn't it? So that will do. That will enable me to put Gothenburg around about there. Now, we are staying somewhere in the south of Sweden for question 4. And that question was, what do the letters IKEA stand for? Now, if you happen to live in a country that doesn't have IKEA, you are actually in a majority in terms of number of countries, although given that they have IKEA in India and China, probably you're in a minority in terms of population. Well, IKEA now has stores in 60-something countries. I mean, there's no point in being exactly precise because no doubt by the time you have got around to watching this, the number will have increased, but it's nearly 500 stores in 60-odd countries, and they tend to be in Europe and North America, some of Asia, and Oceania. Places that don't have IKEA would be largely South America, Africa, and some parts of Asia. So just in case you don't know what IKEA is, it is the world's largest furniture store. And they make flat pack furniture. In other words, off you go to the store, you walk around it, you pick some furniture that you like, and you press a few touch screens, and at the end of your little excursion in the shop, you go and pick it up in a huge cardboard box, and you get it home, and you're presented with 6 million different pieces which you then have to put together. This desk, for example, comes from IKEA. And just before you take it all home, and hopefully don't get too frustrated with how inept you are at following instructions, you stop in the cafe and have some meatballs. So where did IKEA come from? Well, it started in 1943, I think that's right. Yes, 1943. And typical story, starts as a small thing, grows in Sweden. I remember one thing that I learned on a tour bus in Stockholm is that the IKEA factory in Stockholm burned down in the 1970s, and that might be slightly misremembered, but I'm sure it's part of the story of small business made good, small business made world's richest man. I don't know about richest in the world, but certainly the richest European during his lifetime, towards the end of his life, until the founder died in 2018. Well, the founder was called Ingvar Kamprad. hence IK. So well done if you didn't know and you managed to guess well, possibly named after someone. Yes, indeed, the I and the K are the man's initials. But what about the E and the A? Well, I don't think there's going to be much escaping me saying something in Swedish here, because I am going to have to tackle Swedish place names. And that is because the E and the A stand for Eldarid and Agunarid. And they are the farm and the village where Ingvar Kamprad grew up. IKEA, Ingvar Kamprad, Eldarid, Agunarid. Sounds like the end of a news report. What I'd really love to know, and haven't been able to find out, so would be thrilled if you could fill me in, is why did he include the name of the farm and the village? You know, IKE would have been sufficient. IKA also. IKE would have been the results. So why IKEA? And I must admit that I don't know. I have an idea that there are several other successful businesses, retail businesses, that have 4 letters, aren't there? There's Aldi, Lidl, what else? Fnac, the department store, FNAC, car manufacturers, Audi, Ford. Maybe there's something that's supposed to be catchy and successful about 4-letter acronyms. That would be my guess as to why he chose IKEA rather than just the 3. If you happen to live in Agunarid and you know the answer to this, well, do please leave a comment. That would be absolutely delightful if you could do that. Now, one thing I would just like to do is check where that is. And I very much doubt that it's going to be on our road map. So we can see it's not too far from Helsingborg, is it? I mean, if you were to be able to get on a fast train, it wouldn't be far. No doubt that the country roads might take a while to get there, but okay. So where would that be, more or less, on this map here? Well, it's sort of due south of that lake there, isn't it? And just a little way north of what I'm going to call that kink in the coast. Easier said than done to spot that. I reckon it's probably right in the middle of this. Province there. Once again, I'll put the name over here. Clearly I can't claim to have been there, so I'm breaking my own rule of only putting places on the map which I have actually been to. But in my defence, I've been to Sweden and sat at a table. I'm pretty sure I have handled an IKEA thing in Sweden, so but I've sort of indirectly been to the home of IKEA. Well, now let's carry on to question 5, and this one was the one about the Olympics. And as you'll see, we'll be returning to some topics that have come up already. What was introduced when the Olympics were held in Stockholm in 1912? Well, before we do anything else, let's place ourselves in Stockholm. I'm sure that hardly needs doing. I feel like I'm insulting your intelligence by telling you where Stockholm is, but we can see it over there on the east coast, and surrounded, of course, by 1,000 or 2,000 islands. Actually, it's many more than that. It's about 30,000, I think. We're in this neck of the woods here. Slightly larger red blob for the capital. Now, Stockholm and the Olympics have a slightly interesting little footnote before we get to the main answer, and that is, although the Olympics were held in their entirety by Stockholm in 1912, you may know that the last time that Olympic events took place in Stockholm was more recent than that. In fact, I was originally going to make my question about this, and then I changed my mind. In 1956, the Olympic Games were held in Melbourne, in Australia. And all but one category of event did take place there. The only exception was the horsey events. I say horsey, it's obviously more correct to say equestrian. The equestrian events couldn't take place in Melbourne because of the Australian quarantine rules. There's I think it's 6 months that animals have to go into quarantine before they can be released out into society, as it were, in Australia. And so this was certainly the rule at the time. That may have changed, but knowing how strict Australian customs and immigration is, I somehow doubt it. Anyway, this was clearly impractical for Olympic horse riders. So the equestrian events happened in Stockholm. And so in 1956, when most of the athletes competed in their Olympic disciplines in the Australian summer, which is I think it was early summer, November 1956. Well, the equestrian competitors had already long since finished because they did theirs in the Swedish summer. And I think I saw that Sweden won 3 of those equestrian events. But that was just a little 20% extra to Sweden's and Stockholm's Olympic story, because they held the Olympics in 1912, which for a start tells us that even back then Stockholm was a big city and something to be reckoned with in international circles. So they were chosen for the Olympics, and this was a time only a couple of decades, of course, after the modern Olympic movement began. And so there were quite a few things that were introduced when Stockholm held the Olympics in 1912. I'm going to tell you some of the answers, but the one I have chosen to write as the final answer to the question is, I think, in keeping with some of the aspects of Swedish talent that we've talked about already. In other words, it goes above and beyond mere sporting things. So in terms of just sport, the Olympic events that were introduced in 1912 were women's swimming and diving. That happened in 1912 for the first time. Also modern pentathlon, which includes swimming as well as, fencing. Actually, there used to be horse riding in that. I think they've changed that much more recently, but show jumping was previously in modern pentathlon. What else do? They finish with a running race, don't they? And what's the other thing they do? It's all supposed to be rooted in survival skills, isn't it? Fencing, swimming, running, horse riding. Oh, and shooting. So modern pentathlon goes into the Olympics for the first time in Stockholm. And also some of the multi-disciplined athletics events, like decathlon. I think I read that was new in 1912 as well as a technological advance, which was that they used the electronic clock to measure race times. I think that was introduced in the athletics events in Stockholm in 1912. But none of that is the answer that I'm going with. Interesting though it all is, far above and beyond all of that is a staple of the quiz's knowledge. Yes, there was art in the Olympics for about 3 decades, and it was in the Olympics until 1940, what would it be, after the war? 1948. I think that was the last time that art was in the Olympics. It started in 1912. They gave medals for 5 disciplines of art, and this was all part of the vision of the man who drove the creation of the modern Olympic movement. His name was Baron de Coubertin, and of course he was all about athletes being non-professionals, but also artists who were non-professionals could take part in competitions at the Olympics. And so here we go, just a little information about art competitions at the 1912 Summer Olympics. And we can see, here's a little table of the disciplines. We've got a gold medal for architecture. This seems particularly appropriate for Sweden, doesn't it, given some of the examples of modern architecture that we've already looked at. That gold medal in architecture was won by a Swiss pair for a building plan of a modern stadium. I think the rationale for the connection with sport is that all the art had to have a sporting theme. I assume from the fact there is no link to click on here that this building plan never came to fruition as an actual building. There was a prize for literature, and that's a German entrant who wrote something called Ode to Sport. There was a prize for music. That's the old Italian flag, isn't it? Yes. And so that Italian composer wrote the Olympic Triumphal March. There was a gold medal for painting, won again by an Italian, for 3 connected friezes representing winter sports. Well, that seems quite appropriate for Sweden, where it's fairly cold most of the time, in my experience. And sculpture, one for sculpture, which was won by an American for a bronze statuette called An American Trotter. I assume trotter as in a horse. Surely that's a sculpture of a horse. And as I said of the architecture one, I am guessing from the fact that none of these are available to click on for further information, that they are all lost to the mists of time. Wouldn't it be fun to see, though, if somebody somewhere has got copies of this art that won Olympic medals in Stockholm in 1912? That would be such a thrilling thing to see. And apart from anything else, we mentioned architecture. As you move around Stockholm, there's glorious art. I remember seeing it on the metro at various metro stations in Stockholm. There's a metro station called Stadium, I think, or the Swedish word for it, and there were sporting images there. There's a university station where they've got, I think it was images of maps of the world and stacks of books. There's another one where there's Roman temples and all sorts of Art Nouveau collages on the ceiling. So yeah, it's quite a common thing that when you go to metros in some of the cities where they're older, that they are very well decorated, and Stockholm's is among the best, for sure. Now we're staying in Stockholm for question 6. And this is another one which I dare say you may have heard before. What basic infrastructure did Sweden change on Sunday the 3rd of September 1967? And by way of answering this, do you know, I think I'm in two minds. I know what we'll do. Let's just have a look at my old grandfather's schoolboy atlas. Is that, what's that in the corner? No, that's Copenhagen. Ooh, no. Can't have Copenhagen. We need Stockholm. That's quite telling, though. The reason that's interesting is that this schoolboy atlas is from about the 1920s, I think, judging by the age of my grandfather, and when he would have been at school. And in certain parts of the world, the map sort of dates it. I mean, look here. On a modern map, this would be Estonian, Latvian, Lithuania, and so on. Here, there are none of those borders, so that's the USSR, isn't it? But Finland is listed as Finland, not occupied by Russia, so that puts it after, was it 1917 that Finland gained independence? It was around that. Well, so if this was 1920s, they've picked out Copenhagen there as the city to feature in greater detail, which probably tells us that Copenhagen was bigger at this point than Stockholm. And I'm not actually sure that that's still true. What do you think? I bet Stockholm has more people than Copenhagen. Shall we check? I mean, it's what Google's for, after all. Population of Stockholm approximately 2.5 million. What about Copenhagen? Higher or lower? Place your bets. Copenhagen's population varies depending on the area definition. Well, it doesn't everywhere. 2.4 million. Okay, right. So they are very, very close in size. Okay. I think my instinct was that Stockholm would have a larger population just because Sweden is much bigger than Denmark, and for reasons that I can't quite justify, I assumed that Stockholm would be much bigger than Copenhagen. Also, although the tourist centre of Stockholm is relatively compact, it's spread out, isn't it, across many thousands of islands, and so the extent of the conurbation is very, very large. Well, anyway, what was this thing that they changed in 1967? Now, the other map that's interesting to look at here is in the back of this road atlas. We've got city maps. Oh, there we go, that's Stockholm. As just what I was saying, that Gamla Stan, the old town, is very compact, as are the other sites of interest for tourists. And are we going to look through them in a moment? You bet we are. But I think that the just the size of the yellow urban area on that on the road map, a little further down the page, there it is. That's quite a big old area, isn't it? And it was already big in 1967 on what they call, or called, Dagen H. And once again, I have to beg your apologies, your forgiveness rather, for my terrible Swedish pronunciation. We're talking about a day which, am I brave enough? Am I brave enough to have a go at saying the Swedish here? Dagen H, Dagen H perhaps, stands for Höje trafikomläggningen. I'm sorry. This means the reorganisation of traffic onto the right-hand side of the road. This is moving all the traffic onto the other side of the road. And I think it's something like 80 to 90% of countries now drive on the right. One by one, about 40 of them used to drive on the left, and they switched over. And you can imagine on the streets of downtown Stockholm, that takes a little bit of planning. I'm not quite sure what to make of it really, because I have been at a border between where was it? I think it was going from Thailand into Laos, and in Thailand they drive on the left, and so Laos they drive on the right, and at the border the traffic has to go to the other side, and it's very neatly achieved by just having some traffic lights. You don't have to have an awful fuss about it. Meanwhile, I've seen overhead photographs of, for example, the border between Hong Kong and China, where you move from driving on the left in Hong Kong to the right-hand side in mainland China. And they've built extraordinary overhead flyovers and gone to an awful lot of trouble, as only the Chinese somehow know how to do with their extraordinary budgets. But in Sweden, which I think it's quite well known that it happened in Sweden, because it was amongst the last places to do it, certainly in Europe. And there was this day, Sunday the 3rd of September 1967, when at 5 o'clock in the morning, I think actually 10 minutes before 5, all traffic had to come to a halt. And prior to that, they'd already painted the road markings onto the other side of the road. So where you get the stop marks, the double white lines for stop and what have you. They'd painted them onto the right, but then covered them up with some black tape or something. And they'd also installed traffic lights onto the other side, and they were all ready to go on this morning. And the country was awash with people at action stations who at 10 to 5 on this morning all sprang to duty and took away the tape or uncovered the traffic lights or whatever each man's job was. I might go back to a Eurovision reference here, because if you've been to Eurovision, you'll know that in between the songs that are live on television, they have to reset the stage. And so they've got about 30 seconds to do that. And it takes an army of people to come onto the stage, each of whom has one job. They rush on, they do their one job, and they go away again. I imagine that this morning of changing over to the other side of the road might have been something like that. Every man, woman and child would have had some part in it. I'm exaggerating, of course, but a lot of people would have been involved, and it's a huge coordinated effort, along with months of publicity and awareness raising. Now, this first came to my attention when I came to Stockholm and I was doing the tour bus. And the commentary on the bus said, "Have you noticed that there are hardly any trams in Stockholm?" I think at that point there was only one tram line. I'm talking about nearly 20 years ago. Now there are more, but at this time, 2008, there was only one tram line, and they explained on the bus, this is because on this day in 1967, all of the old tram lines were removed and the trams were replaced by buses. And I thought to myself, well, why did they need to do that? Couldn't they just pick the trams up and put them on the other side of the road? And of course, the answer is no, because while a modern tram has doors on both sides, those old trams, we've seen them in some historic cities, though not in Stockholm because they were all taken away. The trams would drive on the left, so you'd have the doors on the outside of the road, and on the other side, with the trams going the other way, the doors would also be on the outside of the road. So if you swap the trams over so that each one is still going forwards, the doors would now be in the middle of the road, and that's why they couldn't use them. Now, I'm fairly well travelled and fairly well educated and capable of understanding quite a lot of things, but I don't mind confessing that it took me a very long time to work that out. The mechanics of how stuff works, not really my strong suit. But anyway, the sad loss, if I may venture this opinion, is that whereas some wonderful European capitals like Lisbon, for example, have those glorious historic trams, they were lost in Stockholm because of this moving over to the other side of the road in 1967, which is a small, sad legacy of that event, I think, anyway. Stockholm, on the other hand, is glorious, and we could argue, well, you don't need historic trams anywhere because it's got a lot more besides. And this is going to bring us on to my next question. Question 7 was, which boy's name is the Swedish word for brown bear? And we are about to see a brown bear in the centre of Stockholm. And we see it on possibly the most wonderful corner of the world. My favourite museum anywhere is right in the heart of Stockholm. I'm even prepared to say that my favourite place anywhere is right in the heart of Stockholm. And it is on this island called Djurgården, and at risk of sounding like a broken record, I apologise once again for my slightly shoddy Swedish. Djurgården or Djurgården, Gordon maybe, Djurgården. This museum island, and if you've been walking the old town of Gamla Stan, you cross over to the area of the central station, and you can get a modern tram. There is a tram now which goes across like that and onto the Djurgården, the museum island. And there are 3 sensational museums. I could even say at least 3, but I'm only able to talk about the 3 that I've been to, and that is ABBA the Museum, I probably don't need to say much more about ABBA because we've spent time on them already. But if you're in town, don't miss the ABBA Museum. Simple as that. I will say one thing about it. They've got a cardboard cutout of ABBA with the faces removed outside the museum, and you can stick your own face in there and pretend to be ABBA. I mean, what better reason do you need to go? Second best museum in my book on Djurgården is the Vasa Museum, and that is the home of a 17th century ship. And I was going to say Viking ship, but that might be a bit late in 17th century. A royal enterprise. I remember from the museum's excellent video history, hearing the narrative that the king came out to witness this sensational new ship, state of the art design. It was a gunship. It was off to war, and it was launched from the harbour here in Stockholm And as the old nursery rhyme goes, the big ship sank to the bottom of the sea. It didn't even get out of the harbour. I think it was too overloaded with stuff up top and didn't have enough ballast, or something like that. The full story is told at the Vasa Museum, and you can see an extraordinary amount of the original ship. They rescued it from the bottom of the water. It's stunning. And those of you who've been to Portsmouth in the UK will know that we have a similar thing in Portsmouth, in the Mary Rose Museum in Portsmouth. A similar story. The Mary Rose was a ship which sank to the bottom of the sea just off the south coast of England. The difference is that the sea off the south coast of England is far saltier than the sea in the Baltic, and that made the difference in terms of how well the wood was preserved. And so the Mary Rose Museum in Portsmouth, it's all sealed behind impenetrable glass that you can barely see through, and they spray all sorts of preserving chemicals onto the Mary Rose, and frankly I was disappointed because it was a struggle to see it for a bear of little eyesight such as me. But the Vasa Museum in Stockholm is everything that the Mary Rose Museum is not. You're standing in front of a massive ship that sank to the bottom of the sea nearly 400 years ago. It's stunning. But ABBA the Museum and the Vasa Museum are, for me, out-museumed by the finest place in the world. Skansen. Skansen is a dream come true. I don't really know if I can put it in better terms than that. It was founded in 1891 by a gentleman by the name of Arthur Hazelius, and he realised that the Industrial Revolution was taking over at a fairly alarming rate, and if the world wasn't careful, it was going to lose the traditional way of life that came before. And so he went round Sweden and he bought up a load of old buildings, had them dismantled plank by plank, and then reassembled right here on an island in the heart of Stockholm for the world to see forevermore. Now, if that isn't a visionary thing, I don't know what is. And it's far more than that, because that sort of idea, just bringing a load of buildings from around the land and putting them there, that could be such a letdown if it's not done properly. And I don't want to be uncharitable, but I have been to other European cities where they've tried a similar thing, and they literally have just put the buildings there and walked off. They don't do anything. The beauty of Skansen is that whenever you go, no matter what time of year, no matter what time of day, it feels like you're actually visiting a Swedish village in the late 19th century. There are people there who are actually doing the stuff that this guy wanted to preserve, whether it's the ironmonger or the glass blower or the carpenter or the people who were churning milk that people could come along and collect in their container and take to their homes. All of these little things are going on. And of course the other risk is, far from just leaving the buildings empty, if you do too much of that recreating, it starts to feel a bit Disney-fied and false. And I can also think of a place where I've had that feeling in a very similar place to Skansen, but Skansen just gets it right. And I've been there. I've been to Stockholm 3 times. I've been to Skansen 3 times. I will never visit Stockholm without going to Skansen. And I remember there's a village shop, a recreation of a village shop there, and I was in there the first time I went there, which was 2008. And I went into the back room, and there was a lady in there who was totally in character. She was playing the role completely. You know, she was pretending to be from the 1890s, and I asked her questions, and she answered me as if she was from the 1890s. And then I came out of the back room and I spoke to her so-called husband. Whether they were genuinely husband and wife, I don't know, but there were people playing those roles. And I said to this man, this delightful Swedish man, he was there in his overalls, beard and glasses. I can see him now. I said to him, there he was behind his shop counter. I said, what are you selling? And as deadpan as anything, he said, we are not selling anything. This is just pretend. And so I think what I want to say from that little anecdote is that they're doing it well. They're playing the part, but they're not taking themselves too seriously. It's just the right balance. And I tried persevering with the questioning and said, well, okay, yes, I know you're pretending, but can we just pretend it's 100 years ago, please? What would you have been selling? And he pointed to a large saw up above the door to the back room where I'd just been. And he said, that sort of thing, what do you think that's for? And he said that he would have sold such a saw to people so that they could go out onto the frozen sea and cut a cube of ice, a block of ice, to take away and use to store food and keep it cold. As Mr. Hazelius originally intended, they are doing their best to preserve a traditional way of life. I'm very pleased to say that when I went back to Skansen 8 years later, the same man was there. And I bet he's still standing there now. I mean, I actually hope that he stands there all the time, never goes home. Now I know what you're thinking. This is all very well, but didn't you ask us about brown bears? Oh yes, so I did. Also in Skansen, apart from the recreated village, there is a fabulous zoo, a Nordic zoo. And I remember seeing reindeers there. Possibly reindeer is the plural of reindeer. Whatever it is, there was more than one there. I remember seeing seals doing their normal larking about. Nordic horses, wild boars, wolves, and highlight, best of all, the brown bears. I think there were 2 on the first time that I went, and second time 1 or 2. I can't remember, but certainly I've seen more than 1. And of course, when I spotted the caption on the enclosure, I noted that the Swedish word for brown bear is a boy's name. Did you guess what it was? Mentioned it already. Björn. As in one of ABBA that we started with. Björn is the Swedish word for brown bear. And I liked, therefore, to imagine that the brown bears that I saw at Skansen were actually part of a successful Swedish pop group. And, I'm not going to say that they weren't playing along, because they were very entertaining. Now, we have 3 questions left, and the next one also sees us staying in Stockholm. The bar in the Hotel C in Stockholm was the first in the world to be decorated in what way? Well, you probably don't have to use your imagination too much here if you don't know for sure. I mean, think about what I just said was on sale in that old, or at least make-believe on sale in that hardware store in Skansen, and you'd be halfway there. Now the location in question is here. It's by the central station here in Stockholm. When I first visited in 2008, it was in a hotel called the Nordic Sea Hotel, and I gather that it's been renamed Hotel C. So I think it was previously Nordic Sea, as in the word SEA. Now it's Hotel C, the letter C. And they are the location of the world's first bar, decorated with ice. And indeed, not just decorated with ice, but built entirely of ice. The bar, the tables, the chairs, even the drinking containers are all made of ice. And I would love to tell you that I went in there and regale you with a tale of just how cold it was, but I can't, because it's jolly popular. When I was in Copenhagen, a week or so before I turned up in Stockholm, I also saw that they had an ice bar there. And I didn't have time to get round to it, and I thought, oh well, it's okay. I know there's one in Stockholm, so I'll just go when I get there. But I turned up and they were fully booked, and I already had plans for the next day, and so I never did get to go in. But we said earlier that Sweden is excellent at marketing stuff, and this is no exception, because you go into the foyer of the hotel, or at least this was true in 2008. You go into the foyer of the hotel, and the bar is there next to reception, and there's a window through which you can see into the ice bar, and you can see that people are dressed in as many layers as they can possibly manage, and they still look cold. And so it's sort of so near and yet so far if you haven't booked. I recall a group of Japanese girls coming in just after me as I was peering through that window, and they too hadn't booked, and they were desperate to go in, and they were I mean, I think they were on the point of crying that they couldn't go in. I decided, I was by myself, so I decided I could live without it, but I would be fascinated to know if you've been to the ice bar. If it's not a daft question, is it actually cold? Or do you feel nice and snug? Because of course there's an old adage that there's no such thing as bad weather. You only have bad clothes. So, I haven't been to the ice bar, but maybe my assumption that it's unbearably cold in there is misplaced. Now, what I just want to do before we leave the topic of the ice bar is have a look at where its parent is. And so let's just, well, first of all, we'll find Stockholm again. There's Stockholm. That's where the original ice bar is. But it is actually a spin-off of Ice Hotel. And Ice Hotel is in the far north of Sweden, at a place which, again, I haven't been to, but I'm just curious to see exactly how far it is. So we need to go up to page 190 for the next bit. Okay, so this is the east coast of Sweden here. I should say, by the way, that the ice bar in Stockholm is actually rebuilt each year. They totally redesign it, and so each year is built in a different theme. And this year's theme is archipelago. Should have said this when we were back down in Stockholm. Well, you can see a little bit of it just there. You see that many an island off the coast of Stockholm. Indeed, I've seen that the world's largest number of islands belongs to Sweden. I mean to say that the country with the most islands in the world is Sweden, according to some, although I've also seen other people say that it's Norway, so I don't know if that's a squabble between Sweden and Norway, or that they'll have to sort that out. Certainly there are a lot of islands in Sweden, so it seems rather fitting that the ice bar's theme is archipelago. That's in this winter of 2025 when I'm recording this. Who knows what it will be by the time hear me saying this. Now, the Ice Hotel is in a place called Jukkasjärvi, and it's near Kiruna. I checked this before, and I know that it's right up here by the borders. See this place here at the top of the map where Sweden meets Norway and Finland. That's where it is. And so that's what we're looking at here. That's the border of Sweden and Finland. Then the Finnish border there continues, and then to the north of all of it is Norway. So we're looking for Kiruna and Jukkasjärvi. Oh, there's Kiruna. Ah, there it is. It's right there. Highlighted in green because it's a tourist attraction, and the reason for that is that that's where the Ice Hotel is. Wow. Look how far north that is. Goodness me. Gosh, it's practically, it's just underneath, it's around about there. I mean, I remember that even on a fast train, to get from Gothenburg to Stockholm took about 3 hours. So that was an extraordinary journey. Definitely a bucket list thing. Jukkasjärvi. If you've stayed in the Ice Hotel, and particularly if you have an interesting little quiz question to share about it, then please do share a comment and tease us all with what it's like there. Now on to the last two questions, and next is question 9, and for that we're going to Uppsala. What was invented by a professor of astronomy at the University of Uppsala in 1742? Well, let's go back to... Where do we go back to? Let's go back to the map of southern Sweden, and oh, there's probably a better page than that. Oh yes. Not so sure actually. It's kind of right here on the fold of several pages, which is a pity, but we see Stockholm just here, and barely any distance north from it is Uppsala. So let's just pop it on our original map here. It's the 4th largest city in Sweden after Stockholm, Gothenburg and Malmö. It's also home to the centre of the Swedish church, the seat of the Archbishop of Uppsala, who is the most senior member of the Church of Sweden. He's resident at Uppsala Cathedral, which is I think the largest cathedral, certainly in Sweden. Also in all of the Nordic countries, I have a feeling. It's a beautiful cathedral. It's just that I think with Uppsala was another sort of fairy tale place which I went to on a cold October morning, and so it was autumn colours, lots of browns and golds and reds in the trees, and rising out from all of it is this sort of fairy tale cathedral, which if you gave a child an orange crayon and asked them to draw a cathedral, that's what they would draw. It's made of red brick. It's got two sort of witches' hat spires. It's absolutely glorious, and it's the tallest building in town, and it's stunning. I went in there and listened to the rehearsal of a choir who were preparing for a concert. And so the most important church in Sweden, and just up the road from it is the oldest university in Scandinavia and also therefore Sweden, the University of Uppsala, from the year 1477. But the year of interest for our question is 1742, by which time we have a professor of astronomy who is based at the university, and he was actually working there for how many years? Nearly 15 years, from 1730 to 1744, which sadly is when he died. Not only was he a professor of astronomy, but also of physics and maths. So any guesses as to what he invented? Well, here's a clue. If you are in most countries of the world, with the notable exception of the USA, you probably refer to his thing every single day. Particularly if you're in the ice bar in Stockholm and you're complaining about how cold it is, and if you're saying, well, here in January in Stockholm, it's -3 out here in the street. Why would I go into a bar where it's 2 degrees colder? If you're saying that sort of thing, then you have Anders Celsius to thank. For it was he who regarded the various temperature scales that were being used at that point and decided that they were a little confusing, and taking the boiling point and the freezing point of water as his benchmarks, he decided that a scale that went from 0 to 100 between those 2 points was exactly what science needed, and everybody appeared to like it, because his scale, which he called a centigrade, meaning 100 degrees, centigrade, it was later renamed after him. And so when we say it's freezing, we mean it's 0 Celsius, and if it's boiling, it's 100 Celsius, although of course colloquially, when we're talking about the weather, freezing can be any type of cold, and boiling is any type of hot, depending on how melodramatic you want to be. By the way, if you do happen to be one of those people who don't speak Celsius, perhaps from the USA, where Fahrenheit I think is the norm, well, of course, Celsius, 0 Celsius, freezing point is 32 Fahrenheit. So there's a chance that you might not be that familiar with it, but the vast majority of the world uses Celsius. And it started in Uppsala, in Sweden. Took a man who was accustomed to being cold to tell us just how cold we were. Now then, finally, we come to question 10, and I've really been looking forward to this, because this is back to Norse mythology. According to Norse mythology, when they dug up the land to make Sweden's largest lake, where did they put it? Now, who doesn't love a bit of Norse mythology, or mythology of any kind, because it is, how can I put this? Probably not true. I hope that's not too offensive a thing to say. But a good story is a good story. And I first heard this tale in Copenhagen, actually, which might give you a clue as to what the answer is. And in my little road atlas, I'd like to find the page which allows us to see. Ah, yes, there we are. All of southern Sweden and a bit of Denmark. Now, I mentioned I first heard this tale in Copenhagen, and then I came across it again when I visited Karlstad, which is here on the shore of Lake Vänern. I think that's how you would say it. The two dots above the A would be Air Vänern. Here we are, it's somewhere like that. Now, I visited Karlstad because I was making my way from Stockholm to Oslo. And I don't know if this is still the case, but in 2008 you had to change trains at Karlstad. They were local stopping trains, so very, very slowly made my way across Sweden from Stockholm to Karlstad, and then had a couple of hours to spare in Karlstad before getting on another train to Oslo. And so, whilst I was there, well, I did two things. First thing is I went into the cathedral. Years before I went into Uppsala Cathedral to listen to the choir practicing, I had already scored Swedish cathedral points by going into the cathedral in Karlstad, and I had the place to myself, and I discovered a hymn book in there, and was delighted to find that I recognised some of the tunes, and even practiced singing some of the hymns in Swedish. Nobody else was in the church, so I gave it some gusto. I will spare you a repeat of the performance. And having done that, I made my way down to the lake, and of course couldn't see all of it by any stretch, because as you can see from the map, it is actually quite big. Not only is it the largest lake in Sweden, it's the largest lake in the EU, so that's pretty enormous. It's 2,180 square miles, which, to give you a point of reference, I always like to count in Liechtensteins. It's 35 and a bit Liechtensteins, that lake. Or if you are one of our Fahrenheit-speaking American viewers, then maybe you prefer to think in terms of West Virginia's. Well, this lake is just a little bit smaller than West Virginia. So what's this Norse mythology then? Well, once upon a time, there was a goddess called Gefjon, who challenged a Swedish king called Gylfi for some territory to call her own. And Gylfi said to Gefjon, yes, well, absolutely, you are welcome to as much territory as your oxen can plough in the space of a day. And Gefjon said, all right, whatever you say. So she summoned her oxen, and those oxen proceeded to churn up 2,000 square miles of land and sent it sailing out to sea. In other words, they dug up this big hole, and it was then filled with water to become the lake. The territory was not lost, however. It sailed out to sea and became the island which the Danes call Sjælland. I think that's right. Probably not quite the right pronunciation, but Sjælland, Sjælland, S-J-A-E-L-L-A-N-D, Sjælland. And we in the English speaking world call it Zealand. It is the Danish island where Copenhagen is. And you might say to yourself, well, yes, obviously that's being not mythology and all that. It's probably not true. But you look at the map and you see the shape of the lake and you see the shape of the island and you think, well, I mean, we weren't there at the time when Gefjon and Gylfi apparently came to that arrangement, so who are we to argue? It looks pretty convincing, doesn't it? And by the way, that is why, from the very start, I drew and coloured in the island of Zealand, just off the southwest coast of Sweden. And with that, I think it's time to go to sleep, if you haven't already. Thank you so much for staying with me to the end and for joining me on this gentle jaunt around Sweden and if you have enjoyed it, if you've learned something, do please give us a like, and even better, subscribe for more gentle jaunts around the world. If you'd like to leave a comment to add your own tale, or best of all, a correction. Be kind about my pronunciation, but everything else is fair game. I'd be absolutely thrilled to hear from you. And I'll see you again soon here on Travel Trivia ASMR.